This is one of my favorite cars on sale today. For under $35,000, I challenge you to find something more fun and theatrical than this Elantra N. A couple months ago, I drove it around Atlanta Motorsports Park to get a sense of its limit, but now I've just spent a week seeing how it is to live with. So let's break down my experience and how it compares to a couple other cars. Now, one of the things that makes this car interesting is the engine. On the surface, it's just a 2-liter turbocharged 4-banger, which doesn't sound that interesting, but here it makes 276 horsepower and 289 pound-feet of torque. It's really, really strong, and it revs cleanly all the way up towards 6,500 RPM. But what's more than that is the sound that you get when you rev it out. Something like a GTI/GLI has 35 less horsepower, and SI has 76 less, so you're actually closer to things like Type Rs and Golf Rs. Now, one really nice thing that you get here is a really good manual transmission. The shifter's a nice ball shape, it's got a nice, precise, short throw to it. The pedal box is fantastically spaced for heel and toe, but if you didn't want to bother with all of that stuff, there's a big red button here on the steering wheel that says Rev. Now, this will control your auto rev matching on downshift. So if you don't want to heel toe, you can press this button and it'll automatically match the revs for you, unless you're in eco mode. We'll drop a gear here, down into second, on power. Listen to those. And then you come back down, you get pops and bangs on the downshift as well. And on liftoff and basically everywhere. Now, there is a way to get more power. If you go for the dual clutch, that red button on the steering wheel turns into an NGS button, which puts the car in overboost and adds another 10 horsepower for a couple seconds. Personally, I'll stick with the stick. And then, as we get to a corner here, downshift a couple. What you get here is a front wheel drive car. So up front you have what Hyundai's calling their corner carving differential, or their e-LSD. And what this does is gives you a really, really good sense that all of the power is getting down to the wheels. The nice thing too is that in your customizable N modes, you can tailor how you want the LSD to react. This diff just does a really good job at keeping the car planted, getting the power down to the ground, and that's also helped by the Michelin PS4 tires up here. This Elantra N loves to dive into a corner. That diff is great, but credit also goes to the Michelin PS4S tires. They're super grippy and aggressive, but for winter you'll probably want to swap them out. There's really only one issue with the front end, and that's the torque steer. On throttle, especially around the off-camber corners at ATL Motorsports Park, I did feel quite a bit of torque steer, which is something that you don't get from a Type R. At dinner after our track day, and speaking with some other journalists, they said they didn't mind the torque steer, and the Type R steering felt too video gamey. So I guess you'll have to decide for yourself what you like better. And now is probably a good time to talk about dynamics. So, yeah, overall, the steering is great. There's a nice weight to it. It loads up in a corner nice and progressively, and I do feel a lot through this rack. It's electronic power steering, obviously, but you do get a good sense of what those front tires are doing. But then when we start to talk about the suspension of the car, it's an electronically controlled adaptive damper, again, on a $32-ish thousand car. I mean, that's incredible. Obviously, in full N mode with everything stiffened up, it does get pretty stiff, but I'm not really gonna cruise the highway like that, so it's nice to be able to have an adaptive damper to kind of soften things back when I wanna relax. Soften back into eco or, normal mode, this thing's actually super livable. But this is an N car, so its main goal is to be good at the limit, and they've actually upped the limit of this thing, starting with the ground up chassis. Behind the rear seats and in the trunk, you'll see red scaffolding back there, which is essentially some tower bracing that Hyundai has added to stiffen up the chassis to give it a little bit more sense of plantedness and less give and compliance into a corner. It's a fantastically balanced chassis. It's nice and rigid. I never feel like there's really any slop in a corner. It loads up well. And the only thing that I'll complain about with the dynamics is that you do get a bit of torque steer. So what it comes together as then is something that has a fantastic split personality. It can be soft and livable if you're going to daily it to work on Monday, and you still get plenty of childish theatrics. How could you not love that? Having spent a full week with this thing, it really has confirmed my suspicion that you can get everything from this car. It has the right power, it makes the right noise, it's got great dynamics, and it's also all while being able to soften it back and get to work on Monday in a supple and quiet ride. So with that, let's step outside, dive a little bit deeper. Okay, so, behind the wheel, this thing is an absolute riot to drive, and to think that this thing is closer to 30 grand than 35, absolutely insane. Now when we start to talk about how this thing looks, this is where it gets to get a little bit dicey. You either love it or you hate it. A lot of people don't really love the front end. Personally, I think with a little bit of body color wrapping here, you'd have a little bit more handsome car, traditionally attractive, but I think objectively it still looks good, at least in my eyes. Now, one of the things that I love about this car is the performance blue paint option. This is how I would spec my car. I would have the blue, I would have the manual, and of course, there's two things that you can change on this car. You can change paint and you can change transmission. Those are the only things that you can get. And of course, the blue is one of the two paint color options that cost money. You know, it's only like $400 or $500, so it's not a huge difference, but I think it's worth it to get this blue. Now, of course, you have LED lights up here. You have a lot going on with the grille, but you do have some functional aero, not this part here, but you've got air curtains that come around on the outside here. And then one thing to be aware of around the front, sides, and the rear of the car, you're gonna have red accenting all the way around the bottom half. Of course, you got your N badge up here. And then as we start to get around the side of the car, you start to see that this is like a smaller compact sedan, but you wouldn't really be able to tell by looking at it. It looks pretty long, and Hyundai's done a lot with the styling to kind of break up the design and make it look a little bit more interesting, and we'll get to that in a minute. What we have here is 19-inch wheels wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires, and this is a huge part of why this car is so much fun behind the wheel. This is a fantastic tire, lots of grip, lots of front end bite. One of the things that I talked about behind the wheel is you will get a good amount of torque steer under load, especially on off-camber corners. So this does a pretty good job at keeping all of the power getting down onto the ground and getting you moving. So that's really nice. Red painted N brake calipers, and of course, red N here all the way back. From the side, like we said, there's a lot of styling and body lines going on. We've got our Hyundai traditional Z cut that we're used to seeing in the Elantras, but you get a lot of black accenting too. The wing mirror, you get your shark fin for your radio antenna, all of your window treatments are blacked out, so objectively it's still a very handsome design. Now, one thing you're very aware of, no sunroof. That's because this comes with the manual. If you get the DSG, you will get the sunroof, but to me, I'll forego the sunroof to get the 3 pedals. Again, just me. Around the back here, we have very angular design. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 6 creases on just like the rear third or rear quarter panel. It's a lot going on, but hey, I think it's still all right. This back wing, especially now that it's finished in black, reminds me a lot of Batman. There's a lot of angles and geometry. It's kind of like a Christian Bale Batman, not so much the moody Robbie Sparkles Batman, but it still looks pretty good. Underneath, you've got your full width LED tail bar. Makes kind of an H design with the running light. I think it looks pretty good, looks upscale. Another thing that looks upscale is the Elantra script out on the back tailgate here, along with your N badge. And then of course, the basically entire lower bumper treatment and the diffuser is black, but it is wrapped around with that red accenting from, I guess, the front of the car. It's made its way all the way back here. You do have a red reverse, or I guess it's just a marker light. It's not a reverse light, but you do have a center light down here in your diffuser, and you've got your dual exhaust. And this exhaust has more customizability than some cars have drive modes. So we'll talk about that when we get to the interior here. Okay, So the interior does get its roots from a sub $30,000 Hyundai economy car, but actually it's a lot nicer than that would make you believe. The seats are really, really bolstered. They're pretty comfy. They do pinch me a little bit more than I'm used to with my legs. Now when I'm driving hard, that's what I want, but just to like cruise around, it does pinch me a little bit more than maybe I would like. Paulo said he doesn't have a problem with that though. The seats are super nice though. They're leather, they're Alcantara, there's blue stitching, there's blue perforation, some design elements. And then one of my favorite things is that you have the N badge in your seats that light up. You know, that's so BMW M3 and M4 that it's just kind of cool, you know? And I like that this car doesn't take itself super seriously. Now, you can have any interior color option that you want, as long as it's black. But overall, the space is decent. It's definitely kind of like a molded around you cockpit design. That translates to a very driver-oriented feeling. Now, again, with the black interior and the lack of sunroof in here, it does start to feel a little bit cramped, but overall it's really not that bad. You don't have a head-up display, which is a little bit interesting, seeing as some of the other stuff that you get, but honestly, at the price point, I'm not missing it. The digital gauge cluster is really nice. You get pretty much everything that you could possibly want to see. It does change for your N mode, but Eco, Comfort or Normal, and Sport are all red, and they're all exactly the same gauge cluster, which is kind of interesting. And you do get this little like circle detail. It's just kind of like an empty space, but they've put a little design over here on the left-hand side of the gauge cluster. Doesn't serve a purpose. I asked in the meeting, they said it was just stylistic, so there you go. The steering wheel itself though, it's a good size. It's not super thick, but I think it's a perfect size for what this car is. Of course, you've got all of your driver safety and assistance suite stuff over here on the right-hand side, and all of your media stuff on the left-hand side as you're used to seeing. And then since this is the manual-equipped car and not the DSG, you don't get the NGS or N-Grin shift button, but what you get is a rev or red rev matching button. So you'll get active rev matching in any mode you want except Eco. It won't do it in Eco. And there are two other buttons on the steering wheel. There are these blue N buttons. Now the one on the left is hollow, and that will essentially just change your drive mode from Eco, Normal, and Sport. And then the one on the right is filled in, and that's how you get into your N modes. And when you hold it, you can go into the infotainment system and you can customize everything from your engine response, your steering weight, how you want your e-LSD and your N corner carving differential up front to react, how you want your exhaust to sound, how you want like everything at all. And the cool thing, as we start to talk about this exhaust, like I said, this exhaust is a valved exhaust, so it'll be quieter in certain modes, and then of course in N mode and Sport mode you get the louder treatment with the crackles and the pops, and it's more animated. But you can actually change the tone if you really want to. So you can have it in Sport, I think race car, and then TCR. So there's not a huge difference, at least that I've noticed, between the sounds, but it's just crazy to think that you have that much customizability from even an exhaust perspective on something that's this price. And speaking of your infotainment system, you hit the home button here, and then you hit the N mode button, and you can see a whole host of information. You've got your throttle percentage, you've got your telemetry, your brake pressure, your engine oil temperatures. You can log your 0 to 60 times, you can log lap times, and you can go to this circuit button here, and that, you can select like your favorite tracks and log your lap times on here. You know, we have a great relationship with Road America that they let us test some of the cars that we get here on downshift around that track. So we could use Road America here. We could go to Atlanta Motorsports Park, which is where I first drove this car, and that's a super fun track as well. So it's just, some of the stuff that you get in here is really cool and really surpasses the price point of what you're paying to get some of the theater and some of just the fun stuff in here. But on the flip side, you do get normal stuff in here too. You do get the sounds of nature that, I love to, kind of jab at a little bit on these Hyundai cars, but it's kind of cool. You do get wired CarPlay and Android Auto, which makes sense at this price point. You do get a quiet mode in here, which is something that we saw on the Palisade for the first time, and that of course brings all of your speaker volume and stereo volume up to the front seats and quiets things down back there in case your kid needs to sleep. Now make sure that you have your exhaust in that quietest setting if you're going to use quiet mode, because otherwise you're defeating the purpose. Generally though, the interior comfort is pretty good. Make sure you sit in the seats before you buy this thing. I can't buy a Focus RS because it pinches my shoulders so much. This, like I said, if you're going to be bothered by the tighter lower portion of the seat, just make sure you test it out. Honestly, for me, even, and I'm complaining about this, but I would still buy this car, even with the seat like this. So the comfort is pretty good. The storage is pretty good. You get wireless charging, 2 USBs, a 12 volt. Of course, you've got your glove box, you've got your center console, 2 cup holders, door bins, and, typical stuff like that. I forgot to mention you do have ambient lighting throughout the car as well, which is super nice. Of course, you can change the colors to those. And then we start to talk about the rear seats. This is what makes this Elantra the most usable, at least to me, N car that they have, even opposed to the Kona. You have the most legroom in here, but again, you don't have a sunroof. It is black, feels a little bit cramped, but I do have the most space back there. You will not get map pockets, you will not get air vents, and you will not get cup holders, at least not that fold down from the center of the seat. You do have cup holders in your door bins in the back seat, but overall, it's a pretty usable space. Now, we start to talk about the trunk then. You have a really, really usable and big trunk back there, at least from my opinion. The seats do fold 60-40, and they only fold from the back, which is fine, but you will notice big red scaffolding bit back there. Of course, that's the chassis bracing that we talked about earlier. Don't worry about it. It's not a problem, generally speaking. It doesn't hurt the volume of your car, and you can unscrew that and take it out if you need to fit something, oblong in the car for, a short distance. If you get like a TV from Target or something, you can take that bracing out with a couple bolts and put it back in. So overall, in my opinion, since the rear seats are more roomy and the ride and cabin isolation is so much better on this even than the Kona, I have to say this is probably the most usable N car on sale today. So I think that's probably a good time to get into the final thoughts. So that's the Elantra N, and I still stand by my claim that it's the most fun you can have under 35 grand. Sure, the 86 and VRZ twins are right-wheel drive, but there's a big power and sound deficit there. Then, on the other end, the Type R has more power, more neutral front end, and more heritage, but you're gonna pay for all of that in MSRP and ADM. So for me, the Elantra N, with its mix of practicality and playfulness, is kind of like a Porsche GTS, the sweet spot. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.